Now that we have our cart selectors, let's actually convert our user map state to props selectors to also use reselect. So let's make a new user.selector.js. And let's actually look at what we're pulling off. If I remember correctly, our header component uses it. And all it gets is the current user. So at this point, it might as well just be worth it for us to memoize these selectors using both a hidden selector as well for cart and our current user selector for our user. So we'll import in our create selector from reselect. And we're just going to get our state selector, select user, equals state, which returns state.user, and then export const select current user equals create selector. And as you remember, the first argument can be either an array of our input selectors, and then our last argument being the function that gets the return of this input selector, so our user reducer, and then we'll return user.currentUser. Now another thing is actually, let's say imagine we had another selector. Like say we wanted to also pull off our hidden, right? So we had select cart, and then let's say we needed the cart hidden value with our user value for some reason, right? I don't really know, but you can imagine where we would come up with a case where we might want to use multiple input selectors. And as we know from our last example, we would get cart like this, where we would be able to use it in some kind of way. But there's another way that you can actually structure your create selector, where instead of passing in an array, you just pass it in as arguments in successive order. The function in the end will still remain the same. So you can either pass all of your input selectors in the order that you want them to appear with their outputs inside of our function parameters, or we can just pass them in as an array. It really makes no difference. Personally, I like to use the array, but it doesn't really matter. So let's get rid of this because we don't need it. So now we have our current user. Let's also make the one for our hidden, and we'll just export const select cart hidden equals create selector with our select cart selector, and then we'll just return cart.cart hidden. Cart.cart hidden, okay. And now let's start replacing the components we have with the respective selectors. Now, we'll import also in another thing called create structured selector from reselect. And I'll show you what that does in a second once we bring in our respective selectors. And we want select cart hidden. And we also want select current user. Select current user. So how we've seen this done before was where we would pass in our state into our selectors, right? So let's say we want a current user. Well, we would take the whole state and then say current user points to our select current user, and then we pass the state in. Now, we know that for hidden, it's pretty much the same thing. We would call select cart hidden and then pass in the state. But if we had 5, 6 selectors, we're pretty much just doing the exact same thing 5, 6 times, right? So what we can actually do is use our create structured selector call. And instead of passing it as a function, we just pass it like so, where the properties that we want point to the correct selector. And then create structured selector will automatically pass our top level state that we get as our map state to props into each subsequent selector. And now if we look at our header component, we'll see that our code should remain the same. We still get our current user inside of our state, and it's being passed in. And our cart hidden still works as usual. Now let's see where else we have any map state to props being called. App.js. We can do this here too. We'll import in from Redux. User selectors. Select current user. Now, even though we only have one selected property that we're passing into our map state to props, we should still use create structured selector, because if in the future we do need to pull in more, then it's easy because we've already converted our code over to using create structured selector. And the main benefit of using it is just that it extends us a little bit less code rewrite than we would normally have to do. Select current user. Now let's actually use create structured selector in all of our other components, like our cart dropdown. So we got to import our create structured selector, and then we can just replace this part of our code and take out the state. And then the last one is, I believe, cart icon. Yes. And then same thing. Okay. And now if we look, our code still all works the same, but now we are able to memoize all of our selectors. Okay, so moving forward now, all of our code is going to be written with reselect regarding our selectors. And this is actually the most common practice when using Redux inside of a React application while also using reselect.